Oscar, what's going on, man? 636. Glad you could join us. Yeah, so anyways, we're just going over the white sturgeon kind of getting banned um provisionally. The sad part is just that it's the same thing really as the salmon. Is the problem is that they blame fisheries and they close the fishery, but really it's the diversion of the water and the mismanagement of the water system. They divert the water away from these streams that have really been producing for years, and pretty much the natural lay of the land, but then they're shutting them down, damming them out, and they're diverting the water into different areas, mostly for like agricultural and stuff like that. But it was the same excuse they use. They talk about overfishing and everything like that, but it's really not the problem at all. It's just the mismanagement of the water and where it's being diverted. And then you notice when um, the groups that want to shut it down are these environmental groups, and they list all these things, and then of course they add overfishing to the end. But the article already states that there was abundance of fish. They were running three three fish a bag every summer, then they reduced it to one. The biggest problem is that they have the indefinite closure, or it says it's going to take a year, so they're closing it indefinitely for a year so they can go ahead and do the review. And that's really problematic because it says at least a year. So you guys know when the government does anything, it can be much longer than a year. So expect that to be closed. And I mean, good luck. If you think their findings are going to come back in a positive way for the fishermen, that's highly unlikely. So keep your eye on that. Do what you got to do. Call some people. Make your voices heard. Get a hold of CCA, and
No salmon,
no no salmon, no sturgeon.
limited on halibut.
Limit on halibut.
It's BS.
Yeah, it is BS. And just the reasoning they're doing it too is it's all nonsense. Blaming overfishing when that's not even remotely the case. So you guys, no abalone. Oh, you can go on. Yeah, NorCal's getting it bad. It's not as bad as Southern California, and I know most of my audience is Southern Californian, but you guys know that it's going to come down your way too. Once they get away with this stuff, they just keep moving down. They'll see what people can take, what they can get away with, keep closing it as long as they can. California has already got 16% of its waters taken away from the MPAs that you can't even use, and it just gets worse from there. So stay vigilant, guys. Keep fighting. Make sure your fishing rights. Yeah, the Great Catch says go to Baja for abalone. Heck yeah, man. It's wild, man. You just hate seeing that, especially when it's not even the fishermen get punished when it's not even a fishing problem, and I hate when the fishermen get lumped in like they're the issue for it when it's not. When it's the own government mismanaging the water system, causing the deaths, and they don't care about the breeding cycles. These people are supposed to be experts, and they just do what they want to do, and then it ruins it, and they find anybody to blame except themselves. OC English says the worst thing to happen to habitats are environmental and animal rights groups. They blame others for the problems, but offer no real solution to fix the problems, but restrict and take anyways of the rights. Yeah, I mean, pretty much, man. It's 100% on key. And then the biggest story we had, and this is the one they kind of came in last week, and I wanted to get to this one. I know, but I wasn't around last week. Of course, when the story dropped, one of the things was it dropped when it was like the day after the debate went down. So, I mean, everybody else was talking about, the debate and stuff like that was definitely the hot ticket item. So this kind of fell through the cracks, but this is a story that we talked about earlier in the year. And this is regarding the Chevron deference. And we talked about how it was a group of anglers could, possibly overturn a huge blow to the federal government. Basically, what the Chevron deference is, it's also known as the Chevron doctrine. It's an administrative law principle that requires federal courts to defer or interpret the statutes made by the government agencies responsible for enforcing them, unless those interpretations are unreasonable. In simpler terms, when the statute is ambiguous or unclear, courts typically give deference to the agency's interpretation of the statute. So basically, what that means is the courts really weren't allowed to offer any type of um, rulings or judgments. The idea was that these federal agencies put in by the executive branch were like they're supposed to be experts, right? And they were supposed to make the rules. And if there was an issue, the courts weren't allowed to rule on them, and they would have to defer to basically send it back to the agency. So if this NOAA says you had to do something, and you're like, well, this isn't in the rules and it's unconstitutional, and you try to challenge it in a court, well, it just got sent. The courts had to send it back to basically the same agency that you were trying to fight with. You basically had no rights, so you pretty much just had to do. One of the things I think it was very bad is because there was no election process. This was established by the executive branch, so this was the branch of the government that's run by the president. So it bypassed the legislation, right? There was no legislation in the House, and it wasn't voted by the Senate, and then it couldn't be ruled on by courts. So you basically were just at the mercy of all these unelected officials to basically do whatever they want. And we've been following this case because this has been around for 40 years, this judgment. And a group of fishermen actually had brought this to light, and it made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in kind of an historic ruling, it was actually defeated. So the Supreme Court, I think it was a ruling, a 6-3 ruling out of the 9 justices, that the Chevron doctrine was overturned, so it no longer exists. And yeah, it's kind of a huge victory, I think. If you like freedom and stuff being held accountable, or having a path where you can challenge things, it's really good. If you like kind of the government dictating everything you can do without a vote, it's very bad. Some people say it's, if you're on one side of the aisle, you think the whole government's going to collapse. If you're on the other side, you just think you can challenge things that are you feel are unfair, unconstitutional. And this was kind of a piece on the ruling, and this is a huge ruling, and it's surprising you don't hear much about it. I think primarily is because so much is going on, with the election coming in, and Biden looking like a rock star on the debate. So that's been the biggest story. And this is a piece written by, I think, one of the fishermen that challenged the thing, and just kind of gives you a summary of what happened. It says, "My name is David Gothel. I'm a 55-year plus commercial fisherman, research biologist, and former fishery manager." Put this on the screen for you guys. It says, is the author of the Endangered Species Chronicles of the New England Fishermen. I discussed these topics in a lawsuit I filed in 2015 with a legal group, Cause of Action, over the legal concept known as the Chevron deference. Most people believe Congress writes laws, the executive branch carries out those laws, the judicial branch interprets and clarifies whether the aspects of those laws are constitutional or correctly applied. It turns out, under the doctrine called the Chevron deference, the regulatory bureaucracy can deem a law unclear or ambiguous and create any regulation the agency decides it needs to carry out in its bureaucratic function. Until past Friday, the courts gave deference of the regulations as the recognized experts, even though no proof is required, no test for ambiguity is applied. The Supreme Court overturned Chevron Friday, saying they had placed a tombstone on its grave. Fishermen, including me, had sued, saying unelected regulators should not have the vast power over our lives. Our case was about paying $700 to $900 a day for sea monitors, even though the guiding legislation for Magnuson-Stevens Act only listed 2 fishermen in the Pacific Northwest being required to pay for monitors, and then strictly limited cost recovery to 3 to 4% of the value of the catch. NOAA Fisheries decided, citing Chevron, that all herring and groundfish vessels in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic must pay for 100% monitor coverage, no matter the cost. In my boat, the cost often exceeded the value of the catch. I was vindicated Friday. If the law does not say regulators can do it, the courts will enforce the law as written, a victory for democracy and the rule of law. So this is a victory for the rule of law, where there are chattering classes. So excise, well, each group has its own reasons, but most fall into several broad categories. Some in Congress are upset because they will have to go on record, do their jobs. Many in Congress have a vested interest in leaving legislation vague so that the bureaucracy takes the heat and Congress can get reelected. The operative word here is elected. The power of the ballot allows us to change members of Congress. The bureaucracy is unelected and virtually untouchable under the civil service regulations. The second major group is people who operate in the shadows, often getting through the bureaucratic back door, what is undoable through the public process, the front door. This includes a whole alphabet soup of nonprofits who employ a tactic to sue and sue a government agency because their cause will not pass public muster, then settle with the agency that implements through rulemaking using the Chevron to cover up and pays the group legal fees with your tax dollars as part of the settlement. Now the option is closed. They will have to deal with the dreaded C word. Anything that forces compromise in the public process fosters a civil society and values and respects all opinions. A win for everyone, not just certain agenda driven special interests. Finally, the bureaucracy must be upset. They will be back working for the accountability of the American people. I've worked with many regulators in the fishery in my career on a one-on-one basis, nearly all reasonable people trying to do their job, but collectively the agencies, they work to revert what the farmers of the constitutions are most worried about. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and people spend other people's money, uh, do not apply any mean test or spend said money if they were on their own. No more hiding behind Chevron and passing the expense onto the regulated. Expenses will now have to be justified and scrutinized by Congress, the only legal taxing authority. However, hopefully, life is about to get simpler and less expensive. Some may not agree with my views, and some say that I'm a hopeless optimist. One thing I do know is that pundits who say democracy will end without the Chevron are just modern versions of Chicken Little. They have been around all my life, and we're still here. The world has not ended, and we can agree on this. I'm an optimist. I'm a fisherman. So I'll link this in the notes here, and so you guys can check it out. This was from Seacoast Online, and again, I don't know how to say his last name, David Gothiel, and it was just a really good piece, And it's crazy that this was a 40-year thing that people have been always kind of debated or trying to get looked at, and it took fishermen to do it, and that's what's crazy. This huge piece of legislation, or not legislation, this huge piece of overregulation run by the government, and so many people tried to fight this thing, and it was fishermen that ultimately banded together, put up some lawsuits, and were able to get it here by the Supreme Court. And just a huge ruling, guys. I mean, I don't know if you guys understand how big this is, but uh, all those fisheries like the NOAA, we deal with stuff like that out here in Florida. One of the biggest problems we have here is like the snapper fishing. Um, the federal government only gives us, so the NOAA, basically the fishery out here, also determines when we can fish, when we can't fish. They've only given us up here in Florida in the Northeast sector, or I think they call it the South Atlantic in their jurisdiction, is you can only keep one snapper for one day this year. They give us one day to fish, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Because they regulate it, they do their own things, and you don't really have a say. You just have to bow at their will. So I'm hoping we can bring stuff like this to light, argue our case, bring it to legislation, bring it to Congress. And it's like he was saying, you have to put it to vote, make these people accountable, explain why you can't do these things, um, and make people go on record, especially here in Florida. That doesn't doesn't really fly with a lot of people here. Fishing's so popular, and they had the same thing on the East Coast. I'm not the East Coast, the Gulf Coast. And what they did on the Gulf Coast is all the states, I think, banded together. It was like Texas, was it Louisiana, um, Alabama, Florida. They said that, hey, we'll regulate it and we'll track the catches, we'll do everything. They took these states had to spend millions of their own dollars to basically track the red snapper in the Gulf because they wanted more time to fish. So they said, well, let us do the homework, let us get numbers. So just look at this. They had the same stuff, but they were dealing with like 2-day openings. So these states had to spend millions of their own money, do the federal government's job. And now what do they have this year? Over 100 days to fish snapper. How bad were the federal government's numbers? How bad was the miscalculations of the NOAA that they went from 1 and 2 fish days to opening at 100 days because they had proper um, data now and proper oversight from states that had to pay their own money to do the job of somebody that's already funded by tax dollars. So I'm just hoping some of these things, come in. So we're dealing with the same thing. Like anybody can go out here in the Atlantic on the east side of Florida and understand that There's no problem with red snapper. You guys deal with the same thing in California with cow cod. It's the exact same thing. You go outside the cow cod zones, you will catch cow cod all over the place. They're they're all over. They bite like crazy. Now that you can fish deep, and you're not supposed to catch them because they have no regulation. They don't know. They don't know what they're looking for. They just closed it down. It's sort of like the same thing with the snapper. So it's nothing's going to change overnight. Obviously, it's going to take a while, but um, these it doesn't dissolve any of these agencies. These agencies still exist, and that's fine. But it at least gives the people an opportunity to challenge it and bring it to people that we actually elect, congressmen, representatives, um, and then ultimately bring it to the court, bring it to local courts, bring it to federal courts, and bring it to judges to at least try to get rulings in your favor when you feel something is unjust or not written in the rules. For as per now, those of you guys, the reason why it's such a travesty is that the federal government is this branch is like I said is run by the executive branch. So basically, the president runs these branches. So that means that there's no election process whatsoever. There's no legislation process whatsoever. There's no oversight. They're just kind of created. They put people in charge who they think needs to be in charge. There's no say. You don't have any say in what goes on with these things. It's really insane if you ask me. Imagine that, like, we have our biggest oversights, the ATF, the NOAA, OSHA, all these big companies that run so much of our lives are not voted on, not held accountable, can't be challenged in court. So until now, so a lot of that changes, and we get to basically thank fishermen for it. So that was just a huge story, and I know we've been following it since the year's beginning, and just wanted to share that with you guys, and just thought it was really cool, and we'll see what happens. Doc Stalker, what's going on, man? Happy 4th. OC Ranger, got to run, brother. Dogs are going nuts. No problem, man. Yeah, and we're out here in Florida, and it's 8:30. Fireworks are already popping off. They're gonna start getting dark here, and they're gonna have the main fireworks going pretty soon. You guys are still a little ways in front of us, but yeah, we'll see. Corey King says, like the decision or hate it, it depends on your political views. Yeah, it's true. If you like the current executive branch and its agency is appointed, you're not happy. But beware, the executive branch also appoints the courts. Yeah, 100%. If your side appointed the judge making the decisions, you're happy. But if the other side appointed those judges, you probably won't like their decisions. It all comes back to politics. Yeah, 100%. It's like what we deal with, like the Supreme Court, right? It's like the if it's a left Supreme Court, everybody hates. Like right now, it's a real conservative Supreme Court, so it's like that's why you hear about everybody on the left is upset, right? They're talking about, oh, we want to impeach the Supreme Court, this and that, because it's a huge conservative majority. But for many years, it leaned left, years and years and years, and you heard the same crying from like the right side of the aisle. So I mean, you're absolutely correct. But at least you have a chance. But this has implications far beyond the fishery. Yeah, yeah, this affects everything. This is like OSHA, the ATF. So I forget, but it's so many agencies. Most of these big agencies are not. They're part of that executive federal branch that we're not part of the legislative process. It's crazy. It'll be interesting to see. It'd definitely be interesting. Jeff at Battlefish, what's going on, man? Jeff says, we'll see how this works. You do realize that the corporations will now be able to use pesticides, continue to poisons with plastics and forever. Yeah, I mean, it could be. It's still got to be, it's still um, has to go to the courts. You know what I'm saying? Like, it still defers to whatever they say. Like, if NOAA says you have to do it, you have to do it. Basically, what they're saying, if it's not written or it's not part of your rules or it's like disambiguous, then it's like, you at least got to go in there and see. But that is one thing. Chevron was one of the defenders. That's why it was called the Chevron deference. Is obviously they wanted things their way, and they said no. We're going to put regulators on board. It'll be interesting for sure. The same court saw the OSHA challenge that SCOTUS refused to see. Yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting. 87 Charlie, what's up, man? Good to see you. Yeah, check out Jeff at Battlefish. He was on our show some months ago when I first met out here in Florida. He's got a good channel. Check him out. If you guys are ever interested in fishing the St. Johns River, should be good. Anyways, guys, yeah, we'll just keep it short. I'll let you all go. I know it's Independence Day. Happy Independence Day to everybody. Get out there and fish. And yeah, just want to bring you guys this story. I know we've been following it for months now, and a lot of you guys were asking for updates. So we'll see what happens. For good or bad, it was a change, and it is what it is. Anyways, guys, I appreciate you all. Thank you for all the support. Be safe out there for Independence Day. Don't blow your fingers off with any fireworks. Get out there and fish. And next week, we'll be back. We'll have another lighter show, some more fishing adventures and fishing techniques. And actually, I think we're going to have a couple tackle store owners on next week to talk about life running a tackle store. So it should be interesting. Get some insight there. I think it'll be fun. And Corey says, but hey, the bluefin are biting. Yeah, man. If you guys are out there in California, y'all need to go out there and get on a boat because they're definitely popping off. They're not shy right now. Corey said, headed out Monday night. Awesome, man. Good luck. I know you already got on them. It should be good. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Later.